Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on FedNow. Before we begin our presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, everyone is muted to limit disruptions. If you have questions, you're welcome to share them with us using that questions feature in your panel. If we have time throughout the webinar today, Kevin or Jason, they'll answer your questions. If not, we will follow up with you after. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you can expect an email by the end of the day with that recording and the slide deck. And finally, after the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a very short survey. We would love to know what you thought about today's webinar and any feedback you have for us for future ones. At this time, I'll hand it off to Jason Keith, the Technology Risk Consulting Manager here at Saltmarsh, to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Nancy. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm going to do just a very kind of quick intro, but really, I think you all came to hear Kevin talk, and that's what we're going to let him do. But for a couple minutes here while we're waiting for folks to get joined in, I guess maybe just kind of go through this. This is our second FedNow webinar we've done. You know, the previous one was prior to launch. Now we're kind of in the post-launch phase. We'll probably do another one after this at some point. It's kind of been an interesting thing to follow. I mean, for those of you that have been following, it's been years in the making, and then finally we're here. So we thought we'd do the pre-discussion. Now Kevin can kind of come back with the post-discussion of what we're finding or what people are finding when they actually get through the implementation process. But maybe to step back for a second, just kind of, if you know me, if you know Saltmarsh, if you know our process, really, we just kind of want to talk about everything that's going on in banking. We want to build our practice around that way. And one of the things when we started thinking about FedNow was this has the potential to impact so many ways that we do business in so many areas that we personally work in. If you think about it, you got compliance, you've got operations, you've got accounting, you've got digital banking, you've got fraud. I mean, you've got so many small pieces. When you add them together, they really, they kind of run the gambit of a financial institution. So, we thought we needed to learn more. We found Kevin kind of through that process, and in our learning, we thought, well, if we wanted to learn more, there's a good chance you did as well. So, Kevin, really kind of we're now on this. We've rolled out, and to me, it felt a little quiet. You've been inside of the process, and it probably feels a lot more exciting to you. But I think what's interesting of note is that, I was looking at your slides. You said you'd updated them already, but as of October 4th, we had maybe 110 banks that were live. On this very call right now, where we have 56 different financial institutions that say within 12 months they will be live, and then a lot of us that are kind of stepping back and waiting, kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. But that's a big chunk of folks that are interested in rolling it out. Obviously, we're into the process now, I think, of considering the risk assessment, considering setting up our operations and how we want to go through it. And Kevin, I just wanted to ease folks because you got to submit some questions in advance, and you had some questions on fraud, some questions on compliance, some questions on implementation. All of those areas are within his presentation. Feel free to send chats to him. He tells me that he can easily kind of monitor chat and work through that as well. But I think we're going to cover everything that you've asked about. And then as you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and let us know if there's something that we can try to answer a little bit more deeply for you. But with that, Kevin, I think you'd have to be on everybody's list for an expert on FedNow right now, and you're a great guy doing presentations. So I'm going to turn it over to you, step back, and try to learn if I can.
All right, let's get this party started. You guys ready for some fun and exciting times talking about electronic payments? Said nobody ever, except maybe me. So one thing, first of all, you're going to be able to see me. You're going to see the slides. You're going to see me, you're going to see the slides. It's not you, it's me, really. In this situation, it's not you, it's me. I'm the one controlling that, making that happen. What we are going to be having today is just going to be an update where we're going to go through and we're going to build off the first presentation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and warn you, some of you are going to go like, hey, I've still got some questions about the basics of FedNow. And I'm going to start off with some of the basics because I just want to make sure we're all level setting. We all understand what this is, what it does, and why it's so cool. Now, those who don't know me, I am known as the Payments Professor. I've got a website dedicated to electronic payments, specifically faster payments. I got a YouTube channel dedicated to electronic payments. In fact, I put out a 30-minute podcast today that discusses what a digital currency is, how it works, and where it's working and not working, and, well, all kinds of zaniness. I've even created an Instagram channel where I answer any question that you have. And I mean any question. I seriously had somebody ask, can I buy drugs with FedNow? I answered that question. Go out to Instagram if you want to learn what you can and cannot do. And I am also known as the Payments Professor, but I'm also the Senior Vice President for Innovation and Strategy at an organization called Pigeon. And that is an organization that actually provides faster payment solutions. All right, if you haven't figured it out, it's probably time for a disclaimer. Probably should have started off with this. I have no filter. People have told me, you know, you have no filter, and the truth is it was never installed. It's not broken. It's just not there. I'm going to tell you things the way I really see it. And I am like this. If you ever meet me in person, I am like this all the time. It's just not me trying to be like this. I'm also not giving you legal, accounting, or tax advice. See, you can read it. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an accountant. I am not a tax professional, but I do tell really bad jokes, and I am a payments expert. Right, moving on. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about preparing for the FedNow service. I built a course all about preparing around the FedNow service. What's it mean? What do you have to do? Because to hear that there were 56 financial institutions planning on doing this in the next year, that is music to my ears to hear that coming in, because I've been working with FedNow for years. It's weird to say that, but it has actually been years, because I was in with the pilot program from day one of working with this and getting it going. So it's been an incredible journey to get here. And I love hearing how many people are wanting to get on board. And I'm going to give you the most current up-to-date numbers on the people that are on board. But let's look at what do you need to prepare. Are you ready? Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you may not be ready, but you still need to get it out there. And you can just be ready to receive. That's the key thing. Next, you want to look at, well, do you understand faster payments? You're here learning about faster payments. But when I say faster payments, notice I didn't actually say FedNow. I get asked this question a lot. What's a faster payment? Well, a faster payment can be a FedNow instant payment, but it can also be an RTP real-time payment. Those two are so similar. I get asked a lot too. What's the difference? Who offers them? But some people will even tell you a same-day ACH is a faster payment. See, a faster payment, it's relative to the situation and to the account holders that are involved. And the big reason I tell you that too is for payments to work, we have to have people on the same networks. And if they're not on the same network that you're sending from and to, that payment's not going to work. So that's why you want to be able to know the different faster payments that are out there and the options that are going to be available to you. Next, do you have a strategy? I love asking people about having a strategy, because they get like a little nervous in their chairs. Oh, I hate when they ask that question. It's just a plan for what you're going to roll it out, how you're going to roll it out. Are you talking to the people within your organization? That is a key part. Hopefully that some of you sitting on here have friends, colleagues, people, maybe they're not friends, but people that you work with in other departments that are listening in on this session too, or at least are attending other sessions. I really do believe, as much as I love you being here listening to me, go listen to others as well and hear what they're saying about faster payments, about the strategies, because you'll pick up different pieces from everybody. They look at it differently, they give different explanations, but your whole organization should be getting involved in this because it affects so many different parts. Next, what about your account holders? Whether they're businesses, whether they're consumers, ask them, what are their needs? Now, don't be surprised when they say, I don't know. I mean, come on, how many of us have been through that classic example where you ask your spouse, where would you like to eat tonight? And they go, no, I don't know. I'm not sure. When you know, sometimes they know where they want to eat, they just want you to say it. Well, that's what your account holders want a lot of times too. Is they're not sure what they want, but they know what they want, but they don't know how to say it. So you've got to talk to them and find out. And I ask this question a lot. Do you have account holders coming in and saying, I need FedNow instant payments? And I'll bet most of you are going to go, nope, we do not. So we don't even need this product. Move on. What about this though? Do you have anybody call up and go, where's my money? When's this check going to clear? When's this going to be taken out? When will this be deposited in my account? Those are questions of people going, I need faster payments, just so you know. All right, next. What exactly is the FedNow service? It is the newest, latest, greatest thing to come from the Federal Reserve banks. It is instant payments. It is payments that take place any day, every day, all day. But they are US-based payments only. In fact, let's start going through the list. These are credit push payments only. When I'm in person with people, I love to do this. I say, raise your right hand. All of you, I can see you, contestant number 42, 43, you don't have your hand raised. Raise your right hand and go like this, go credit push. Doesn't that feel good? Credit push. Yes, it is a credit that is pushed out to somebody. Somebody has to go in and decide that this money is going to leave my account, because there are no debits. There is no going in and taking money out of somebody else's account. These are transactions that are authorized and sent by the account holder, business or consumer, at the time that the transaction takes place. That's a big deal. Some people go, but wait, there's no debits. This isn't going to work for me. I need a debit system. Well, there is what we call a debit mechanism, which is the request for payment. Now, the request for payment works like this. Will you send me money? That's a request. It's asking somebody to go ahead and send them money back. And the request for payment, it's actually the request for the money to be sent. And it's done through very secure rails. It's done through the Federal Reserve. It's done through the banking system. It's done through these secure channels. Unlike, you know, when you get those phone calls all the time, spam stuff coming through or through some of your email, these are much more secure communications going to account holders that allow them to be able to respond by saying credit push instead of the classic debit we work with. Now, I've already said, these are payments that are any day, every day, all day. They're 24/7, 365. I call them the Shakira payments, whenever, wherever they're going to take place. They use the latest, greatest ISO 20022 standard, which is just a standard formatting for messaging, really, that has been dedicated to the financial sector. They have the ability to where you just receive. You don't have to send payments until you're comfortable with them. On the FedNow network, I'm telling everybody, first sign up just so you can receive these payments. And when you get comfortable receiving, then you start adding in the send. Sound good, right? Now, I got to tell you though, some people tell me, well, if everybody signs up for the receive, who's going to send? There are already some participants that are out there sending transactions. And one that we're all paying very close attention to is the U.S. Department of Treasury. They have come out, and I've got a video on this about their actual some interviews and comments they made, and they have come out and said, yes, we are going to use FedNow. Now you may ask how, and they say, we're not sure, but they are building use cases. They're just not making those use cases public just yet. Other benefits too. There are limits on it. There's all kinds of reports that are available. There is what we call a liquidity management tool that is available because it is a 24/7, 365 system that allows financial institutions to support each other to make sure you always have money available in your Fed account. Because that last one, and this is important, these are immediate and irrevocable payments. These are payments that have immediate funds availability and they're irrevocable. Right here is the part where so many senior executives and financial institutions go, stop, hold on. You're telling me I have to make these funds immediately available and it's irrevocable? No. Well, this is actually what is so good about FedNow, but it's also what's so scary about FedNow. You ever hear your strength is your weakness at the same time? The immediate funds availability is something that is quite important for being able to operate with FedNow. But it is something that is scary too, because people are like, oh, what if I sent the money and exited? What if it was, I'm going to use the F word, fraud? Well, just so you know, first of all, I'm going to address the fraud thing. I said it, we got to go there real quick. Let's go off a little side, speech going on here for a second. Can I ask you what payment channel you work with that has no fraud? Oh, they all do. In fact, I'm willing to bet any of you special financial institutions that if you take and look across the board at the different levels and amount of fraud you have, checks is winning. I'm willing to make this bet because I've got all kinds of data that supports that. Followed closely by cards too, yes. But what do we hear in the headlines? What do we see in the news? Zelle. We see, these instant push type systems. Well, yeah, okay, that's in the news, but it's usually about a 1% of total transactions versus a 6 and 7% of total transactions in other payment channels. Point being, there's always going to be fraud. However, there are so many tools to be able to control the fraud. There are tools like, for example, us at Pigeon. We have tools that are built in to allow you to be able to determine how much you can allow per transaction and how many transactions per day that you're going to allow account holders to be able to send. You can set alerts for how much they're bringing in. So in case you maybe need to identify a money mule or something like that. There are limits, there are controls that have been put at the Fed level. They have what's called a negative list. You don't want to be on that list because you won't be receiving money if you get added to it. There's a lot more that goes into that. I'm not going to go too deep into it. There is fraud monitoring taking place at multiple levels. There is a requirement for fraud reporting, unlike we've ever seen in any other payment channel happening with FedNow. So there's a lot when it comes to fraud, but still some more on that immediate and irrevocable. People say, I'll never be able to get it back. And I say, that's not true. If you have an ACH that goes out by mistake, can you get it back? Some of you are screaming, you can do an ACH reversal. What about this? You ever had a wire that you sent out on mistake and you needed to get it back? You can try. You can, right? Now, in both the situations, the ACH and the wire, did you get it back every time? And I'll bet the answer is, well, with ACH, probably most of the time, but not every time. With wires, the answer is probably sometimes. With FedNow, we have what's called a request for return. The request for return is a specific messaging protocol system thing that you can do to be able to attempt to get funds back. Because just like the reversal, just like the wires, they are attempts to get funds back. They're not guarantees. So is there a possibility money sent and it's gone? Yes, just like in every payment channel. Is there a possibility that money sent and I can retrieve it? Yes, yes, there is. There's the request for return. But it has to be irrevocable for that immediate funds availability. But a note on that immediate funds availability. You, as the receiving financial institution, yes, you're going to make these funds immediately available unless there's special circumstances to where you're like, I can't do this. Well, in those cases, yeah, you're not going to make funds availability. Those are going to be like the total true exception. 99% of the time, you're going to be making them available, but you're going to have the funds. Because you see, before you make them available, settlement at the Fed level has taken place so that you have the funds. You can't lose out on this. Any questions? Let me know, because we're now going to move into the world of how will we use this? I love this list because this list I basically have tried to think of domestic only. Again, it is domestic only. You do have to be signed up on the network to be able to send and receive, of course, but it's basically any type of account to any type of account. I know my AAPs out there, I ask you, hey, how many SEC codes are there? And you're like, too many. Because there's SEC codes to be able to define every type of transaction, every type of payment. There's 23 for those of you who need to know. Okay, but here, we don't actually have to define any of that in FedNow. It is just sending from one account to one account. And it's the type of account that determines the type of payment. So anything involving a consumer, a business, or the government, it can go to any of those entities. Now, when I say government, I do want to stress something. There is federal government, and then there are state, local, municipality type governments, and they're totally different. Federal government payments, as I already hinted to, that's U.S. Department of Treasury. That's going to be like Bureau of Fiscal Service. Yes, they are live on the FedNow network. Yes, they are a participant, and yes, they did even send transactions on day one. But they also haven't told us exactly the use cases that they are using for it that are more specific than the types of accounts. I believe we're going to start seeing things though like IRS payments paid out, FEMA payments, that type of stuff, maybe first-time enrollments and Social Security. As far as other use cases for your individual financial institution, your account holders, we don't have enough time for me to go into all the ones that are out there. I've built a session that's over an hour long covering that. I got a list of about 300 that I've come up with. We got to move on because the question then comes, how do I actually access FedNow? This sounds great, but how do I get access to it? Well, if you're a financial institution, we're going to go into more detail on this later in the presentation, so stay tuned. You will connect through either FedLine Direct, through a correspondent bank, or through a service provider. But if you're a consumer, if you're a business, you're going to connect through whatever is provided to you from your financial institution, because unlike Venmo, unlike Cash App, this is a secure payment channel that goes to the Federal Reserve that requires a connection through a financial institution, through the bank, or through the credit union. You can sign up to be receive only. I already said that, but I want to reiterate that point. It's very important to know that you don't have to allow the sending of transactions. You can choose to be receive only. You remember that request for payment I said? You can choose to be receive only and have the ability to send RFPs. Let me load up, oops, go back. Let me load up the bullets here, because what does it say on the screen? I hate to be the guy who takes it off the screen so you can't read it, but who's going to go back and read you what's on the screen? I'm going to be that guy though. It says receive only participants are not eligible to receive RFPs, but they are able to send RFPs. Let's unpack that for a second. If you do sign up, one of the ways you can sign up to be part of the FedNow network is just to receive transactions. That's number one. A second way is you can choose to receive transactions. Your account holders, they get those credits to their accounts, but you can also add on the ability for them to send a request for payment. Now, you see, when you send a request for payment, that's just asking somebody to send you money back. So if you're receive only and you say, hey, send me money back, you can receive that money coming in. So it's possible for you to be able to do that if you want. It is not possible, though, to be receive only and receive an RFP. Receive and receive, can't receive. Wait, what? See, a receive only participant who were to receive a request for payment, you have to be able to respond by doing a credit push, by doing a credit send. So receive only participant cannot receive RFPs. How many times did I say receive in the last minute? Well, a lot. But did you guys follow that? Because that's an important one to understand when you start looking at how am I going to offer this? How do I want to expand and grow? If I start off just receive only, what's the next step? It could be RFPs, or it could be going to send. Let's keep going, because we do have the send and receive. This is it. This is easy. You send and you receive payments. But can I add a little bit to that? You can always add in the RFP too. That's another option to go with it. On the receive side of things, that's your 24/7, 365. If you're receiving, the way the Fed looks at it, the way the operating circular 8, very important, the way the operating procedures, the way they outline it, you got to be available, 99.9% of the time, really 100%, to be able to receive transactions 24/7, 365. But on the send side, you as an institution offering this enhanced product or service, you get to determine when it's on and when it's off. I know that's one of the things, is, again, a service provider, we give to the ability to our users. You want to turn it on for just the weekdays because that's when you're comfortable with allowing people to send, go for it. You want it on, all day, every day, go for it. You want to turn it off on the weekends, go for it. Because the send side, there's some control over when it's on, when it's off, because you make that decision as an institution. But let me clarify and let me say it again. On the receive side, you always must be able to receive and make those funds available, unless there's an exception. So everybody good on that? I'm going to keep on going because there are some expectations that are going to be in place. And those expectations go more towards the sending. If you are going to be sending, then one of the things that's real important is making sure you have funds available to send. And this is funds available at the master account level, at the Fed level. Some of you may be going, do I have to check my account holder's account before I send? That's up to you. That's totally different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about making sure we have money at the Fed level. So the Fed, with their PSR, payment system risk policy, on intraday credit and making sure you don't have negative balances, applies that and has the expectation that you're going to always have funds available, because settlement happens immediately at the time the transaction takes place. And most of these transactions right now in the Fed network today are taking place in less than 3 seconds. They have 20 seconds, but they're taking place in less than 3 seconds. So what happens, part of the onboarding process, more of that to come, again, still, I'm giving you little teasers here. What happens is during the onboarding process, when you go to sign up for this, and I got a whole course on onboarding, but you got to be able to determine what's the routing number I'm going to use. That could be easy. It could be your routing number, but it could actually be the routing number of somebody else too, depending on how you want this to work. But that's something to be thinking about. Of you 56 who said, hey, we're getting on in the next year, you're going to want to know, what master account am I going to use? Will it be mine, or will it be somebody else's? Will it be somebody else who monitors mine for me? Those are things and considerations you got to have. So you're going to have to look at where settlement's going to take place. Here's a really fun one. Can I have more than one routing number? Yes, you can have more than one routing number, but you can only settle to one master account. Let me say that again. You can have more than one routing number used for different purposes, maybe different products or services via the FedNow network, but Only one routing number is used for all settlement for that financial institution. Also, something you fill out and do during the onboarding process. Okay, what about reports? How am I going to reconcile this? How am I going to work with all of this? Don't worry, we got you covered. Well, the Fed's got you covered, and so do the service providers, because there are all kinds of different reports that are out there. Specifically to FedNow, there is the activity totals and the activity details report. These are reports that are created, they're available on demand, and they're created also at the end of what we call the FedNow service business day or cycle date, that go through and they detail and they tell you all the information. They tell you all the activity. Well, actually, the summary just gives you a summary of the activity, but the detail tells you everything that's taken place. You also have the ability through your service provider or through the FedLine portal to at any time say, what's my master account balance? So maybe you need to draw down money or put more money in it. You have that available. And for those of you who have been using other Fed services for a while, no worries. They have taken these standard reports that we use in other payment channels, the daily statement of account, the FIRD, and the SASF. Those have been updated to now include, well, 24/7 or 7-day accounting, of course, which recently happened and affected many of you, like all of you, and also then updated these reports to include FedNow. So that's our introduction to FedNow. That's the basics. That's the important stuff to know. But what we're here to talk about is connecting to FedNow. What does it mean to actually connect to FedNow, and how many people are actually connected to FedNow? July 20th, 2023. Where were you? I know where I was. I was actually in Orlando at a bowling alley at a reception event, watching my phone as this happened, because the truth is July 20th, 2023 for the Fed was July 19th at 7 p.m. Don't try to figure that out too much. It's just when a Fed day starts and ends. And I'm sitting here watching my phone as FedNow went live. How many people, how many participants, what would happen? What did it look like? There were 35 participants on day one. On October 4th, the Fed announced 108 people were there during their We're Going Live, during a live event in Chicago. As of today, and yes, I did just check the FedNow Explorer website, there are 177 participants on the network. 35 to 77. Oh, I should have done the math and figured out what kind of percentage growth that is. I know one of you out there just did it in your head, and you can put it in the chat. I would love to know, because that's showing some growth, rapid growth. And I know there are a lot more coming. I know this from the service provider side of things, as my team is working with onboarding individuals, financial institutions to be part of the FedNow network. I know this from talking with my FedNow friends and hearing what they're experiencing as people are more and more wanting to get on board. I said, as we were talking about this session before we went live, I remember when I had the BlackBerry. I love my BlackBerry. I mean, I could do my email from wherever I was. It was kind of neat. You know, I two-thumbed everything. It was different. And it was wonderful until the day I saw and used an iPhone. I put my BlackBerry down and have never looked back. That's what's happening with FedNow. It's here now. It's not just concept. It's not just theory. It's reality, and it's out there and it's available. So how do you go about actually connecting? How do you go about being part of it? There are different options. Number one, you can sign up to connect to the FedNow service on your own. If you have the programming team, development people, you know, I mean, the large financial institutions, your Bank of America, your Chase, your Wells Fargo, this is exactly what they have done. They have a direct connection to the Fed. They use their FedLine solutions connection to be able to go through, and they take care of everything. They design their own apps. They manage their own master account. They manage their users who have access to being able to manage the FedNow network. How many of you is that you? I got a feeling nobody raised their hand on that one, because that's the more encumbersome part. That's the one that's going to take a lot more work of building everything yourself. But if we move on and we look at other options, this is the actual most common one. There's still another option, a couple of them coming up. It's using a service provider. Now, of course, you're probably going, well, he represents a service provider. I do, because I absolutely love what FedNow is doing as far as opportunities for all of the country and their account holders and the many benefits it comes with. Well, the benefit of a service provider, and there are others besides me you can use, just to let you know, is first of all, you're going to somebody who's already established, somebody who's already part of the FedNow network. Now, this is important, this first bullet, just because you've got to go through a testing process. It's required during onboarding that you got to go through testing and certification to be able to get on board. If you go through a service provider who's already completed that testing, it's a much faster process. If you go through a service provider and you're their very first customer going live, it takes more time. I know, I've been there, I've done that. And that's going to be something that if you go direct, you have to do that testing as well too. That certification process, it has to be done. Other things to look at. The service provider manages that connection for you. That 24/7, 365, it's always up, it's always working, they do that for you. They may or may not provide you a payment app. In fact, you can work with multiple service providers. Remember, like I said, you can have multiple routing numbers because you may have apps that are using the FedNow network for specific use cases. Hey, I use this one to be able to send money to P2P, but I use this one over here to be able to pay the tow truck driver so he doesn't take my car away and has his money before I walk away. But your service provider or your financial institution, you can handle the messages, or you can manage your user accounts. All that's up to you. In this case, though, you will manage your Fed master account. Service providers, I've seen, I do look and see what the competition's doing. Let's be honest here. And I know we do this too. We can monitor your master account, as in you give us access, we can tell you what's happening with it. But what we cannot do, what we don't have a whole lot of control over, is actually putting money, taking money out of it. That's not something we normally do. But we can send you alerts if something happens. Oh, I got a good question. Oh, and I know who that question's coming from too. Does anybody know what volume looks like with FedNow? No. It's like Area 51. We're not sure what's in there. And the Fed will not release the numbers on exactly what the volume looks like right now, which is ironic because we know RTP has been very heavily releasing their numbers. And the RTP network, the private sector and what they're offering for instant payments, they average 750,000 transactions a day and have had million transaction days. But the Fed itself, thank you again for the question, they do not actually release the numbers. In fact, getting the latest as far as participants, I was giddy when I saw that they did update the list, even though there hasn't been a press release to go along with it. Okay, thank you for that question. Let's move on to option number 3. Now, option number 3 is a direct connection use of a service provider. And what you're doing in this case is you're basically, wait, that's a repeat of the one before. I don't think I updated my slide correctly. Yep, it's a direct connection and use of a service provider. I did update my slide. The only difference is you have a connection yourself, but you work with the service provider who provides you an app. You're still managing your connection, but you're using their app to be able to have access. All right, next one is where very important comes in. And I'm not saying you have to use this, but it's a very important concept that we got to make sure that we get. And that is using what we call a correspondent. Okay, let me explain what a correspondent is. We have certain terms that have come about with the FedNow network that are really new to the FedNow network. We have correspondent and respondent. And correspondent is basically going to be, I tell people, think banker's bank or think corporate credit union. But it could be like a large regional corporate credit union, or large regional credit union, or a large regional bank too, or a larger bank that's helping a smaller one. A respondent is going to be the smaller credit union or smaller bank that makes use of a correspondent. And what correspondents can do is many things. First of all, a correspondent can actually provide you the connection to FedNow. If you go through a banker's bank or a corporate credit union now for any of your services, you could go through them for your FedNow connection as well. They may or may not provide you with an app that is used. That could be front end or back end. I know that's something we try to do. Make sure you've got a front end and a back end app to be able to do all this. They can monitor your messages for you. The big one is the last bullet at the end. And that is the master account management. That is making sure liquidity is always there. Okay, managing the master account, this is a big deal because in managing the master account, it's most important for send. I mean, on the receive side, if you get too much money sitting there, you would want to move it, I would assume. But on the send side, you got to always have money there. This is 24/7, 365. Raise your hand if you want to just put a cot in the back office of operations that you sleep in and spend all weekend at your bank or credit union. No, I'm not doing that. So what you do, or what you can do, especially if you're sending, and when you go to send, because everybody will at some point, you can have the use of a service provider who sends you alerts, or you can have a correspondent that you can use their master account. They provide that as a service. You use their master account, the correspondent's account, instead of your master account, and they manage that account. They make sure it's available, that it's always got funds. Or you can use your own master account, and the correspondent monitors it. The correspondent over the weekend, on the holidays, late at night, they're the ones looking at and making sure you've got funds always available. And if it starts to get low, they use the liquidity management transfer tool to move some money over to it. Or you do it all on your own. Up to you. Now, if you're only receiving, you're probably okay with that. If you're going to start sending, that's where you want to be more aware of what's being sent. And, full disclosure, I already told you, you can control when you send. I do believe, in fact, I know from what I'm already seeing of there are institutions in just a few months highly successful with what is happening with FedNow. And they are saying that they turned it on, they've got it 24/7, they've got what they call reasonable limits, nothing too small, but nothing too high, that are in place for allowing people to send and receive, and it's being used. This is the beautiful part. Actually, Star One Credit Union, there's an official release that the Fed put out on this, a PDF. You can go out there, so I can say that, Star One Credit Union. You can go learn more about what they've done. And what was interesting is they did not market this. They just turned it on and made it available, and people started using it right away. You made it available, it's there, and they suddenly started using it. They had an option that said send money instantly, and people said, yep, I'm going to do that. And I think that's brilliant, because I already see that in so many other things. People really do expect it. So using a correspondent just allows you to be able to have multiple options. Which option is the best one? Well, that depends on you. It depends on your institution, what resources are available to you. I would even consider how I'm processing now and work that into consideration, because I may want to keep things streamlined and similar, or because it is different in 24/7, 365, you may make changes or adjustments. But what are the common questions that are out there? Again, the most important question today is your question. So any questions you have, put them up there. I will definitely address them. But if you haven't figured out, what I do a lot of is I give you the questions that I'm seeing the most often, and I try to answer them. I'm going to do that again right here, right now. What are the most common questions for onboarding? Okay, when you start onboarding with the Fed, you're going to hear things like, oh, the OBM or the AE is going to be able to help you. Huh? For real, I was involved in a call and heard this, and somebody said to me, okay, what's my OBM and what's my AE and why do I care? So you have an account executive, and you also have your service customer representative with the Fed. You'll want to be talking to them. I know they're busy right now too. And the reason I know is I get emails from the internet. And I've had a couple of banks or credit unions here recently email me and say, I can't get my representative. Can you answer a couple questions for me about onboarding? And of course, I've done what I can to answer those questions. But your OBM is your onboarding manager. So what is happening is, and what I want to basically say is, what's it look like to onboard? Are there going to be people there to help me? And the answer is absolutely. The Fed has dedicated resources to make sure that you have people there to walk you through the entire onboarding process. Here at Pigeon, we have done the same. We work hand in hand with our customers to get them on board and the Fed team. It's like a trifecta that's taken place. Well, I know we have outlined, I'm sure others have too, checklist of everything that needs to be done. I've got, again, a presentation coming out on all of that. Jason's probably writing it down, going, get Kevin on here to do this presentation. And we go through everything that's not to be done as far as what's it look like, what's the timeline look like, what forms have got to be signed, who signs it, who's it get turned into, who does what in the whole onboarding process. But to make sure that you're able to get this done, that's where you have the OBM and that's where you have the AE. the account executive, and the onboarding manager that will handhold you through. That's from the Fed. Your service providers, talk to them and see what they've got too, because like I said, I know we've got a dedicated team. I would imagine others do too. Second question that's up there, what forms are required? So quick question on the forms, thing I want to get across on the forms. Onboarding to a new Fed service, anybody who's done it out there, historically probably took a long time. With that said, part of the reason it took so long was making sure all the forms did get filled out, and they required a wet signature. You know, you actually had to sign a physical document and get that submitted and turned in. And that would slow down the process. Well, to make sure that the Fed process with the forms goes a lot faster, they have now made it to where you can electronically sign all these forms. So that's greatly speeding up the process. If you're curious about some of the forms, Operating Circular 8, OC8, Appendix A and Appendix B are sample forms that are filled out. There's two different forms because it does depend on, let's go back to your connection options. How are you going to connect? Are you going to go direct? Are you going to go through a correspondent? Or are you going to go through a service provider? When you make those determinations, then that determines which form. Again, if you want to see examples, Operating Circular 8, Appendix A, and Appendix B. Real easy to find with a Google search, trust me. And anybody who's already pulled it up went, well, there's not much to this form. There's really not. The thing that's mind-blowing a lot about FedNow is it's pretty easy, simple service. And we're just turning, things on, but we got to designate how we're connecting, who we're connecting through, what routing numbers we're using for processing, and what would be the settlement account. Plus, very important, you do have to designate the authorized personnel, and you must have specific personnel who can be contacted in the event of any type of emergency. Question number 3. What routing number is used? How do we designate multiple routing numbers? And how is a third party going to be designated? I tried to answer that as we're going along because that is, a really packed question. The routing number that's going to be used. Let's start with, first of all, do you only have one routing number? If you're an organization with only one routing number, you use it for everything, that's the routing number that's going to be used for processing purposes. That's going to be, what makes sure that money comes to you as it should. That's going to be what identifies you when you send things out. Easy enough. However, I know some of you may have multiple routing numbers. We use this one for ACH, but we use this one for wires. Which one are we going to use for FedNow? Up to you. If you want to, you do not have to. Oh, please, please, nobody mishear this. You do not have to have a special routing number just for FedNow. But if you want to, you can. But you do not have to at all. If you only have one routing number and it works for everything, you'll use that one routing number for FedNow. But when it comes to the designating of the master account to be used, that's going to be critical. And that is some additional fields really in the paperwork that has to be accounted for. And if you're working with a service provider, you have to designate your service provider. You actually have to fill out the forms that designate this is the service provider we use. This is a service provider that is our authorized connection to the FedNow service who all of our transactions process through. This really helps the Fed because if there is ever a problem with that service provider, the Fed knows who's going to have problems with transactions right away. Next question. All right, what is a FedNow profile? Where and how is it configured? I know I just skipped a bunch of you going, hey, he went correspondent master account. I felt like I've answered that in the last question because I really went off and elaborated, but if I need more, let me know. So let's go on to what is a FedNow profile and where and how is it configured? Okay, your FedNow profile, if you're video gamers that are out there, or if you've ever used pretty much anything on the internet where you have an account and it has your settings for how you like things to appear, what font you want to be able to use, the defaults, the stuff like that, that's what your profile is. Your FedNow profile is available through the FedNow portal, and the FedNow profile is what defines and outlines how you are configured and set up to be able to use the FedNow system. That is where you'll be able to have things like, for example, if you want to have lower limits on what is sent, as far as what you will allow to go through the FedNow service, that is where you would configure them in your FedNow profile on the FedNow portal online. That profile is configured and is set up during the onboarding process, but can be changed as needed as you evolve with the usage of FedNow over time. The profile, though, again, it just simply defines who you are, how you work, and how you operate on the FedNow service. Everybody on there has a FedNow profile. Okay, what does testing look like and what is the process? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Is this thing working? Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Testing is actually not that complicated. And what they really do, like I said, if you already go with the service provider who's already gone through the testing process, it's super quick and super easy. They just send a series of transactions, dummy transactions, first of all, in a test environment. There is a test environment that you can go use to be able to confirm your system works like it's supposed to. You then can go on to the live network, and on the live network, you're able to then send some dummy type transactions just to make sure that you can send and receive all the appropriate transactions. In that ISO formatting, there are transactions that are for the purpose of like moving money. There are transactions, like I said, you know, what we call more non-value messages that are for like, hey, can I get that money back? There's even what we call a request for information. There are messages for reporting. So you go through a series, you go through a process to become certified that you have the ability to send and to receive all the required messages that are, you know, they're used for FedNow. So that process, and then describing that, you're probably like, oh, that takes a long time. It actually doesn't. Again, if you go to somebody who's already done it, it's really quick. What I want to say within a few days, you're certified. It's really that kind of quick. If you were going brand new, you're going to be looking at a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to make sure that everything's done. And in most cases, all those times I just gave are being exceeded. They're doing it much faster. All right, another question. What happens after testing? You're going to love this. What happens after testing? You go live. Once you've gotten certified for being, you know, on there that you can do everything you need to do, that's when you're able to go live. Now, do you have to go live immediately after finishing testing? Actually, no. And I know this, we had one of our customers that we did everything, we got them set up, but they're like, we are not turning this on yet. We're not ready. It's like, what? And the reason being is they came back and they said, we're still building some of our policies and procedures, and spoiler alert, compliance is the next slide. You got to build dispute resolution. And so they were still building some of that and said, don't turn it on just yet. All right, last question I got on here is, do you have to recertify? Well, I'm certifiably crazy is what I've been told before, but when it comes to being recertified as being crazy, I don't have to do that. Once you know, you know. But with FedNow, you don't have to recertify unless you make changes to how you're operating, in which case you may have to do some tests to make sure everything works if you make major changes. But in most cases, once you're certified, once your service provider is certified, you're good to go to be able to operate in that. And a lot of times I am telling people too, you may choose to be receive only, but why not go ahead and sign up for send and receive, but just turn send off. That way you're certified for it, you can work with it, everything's ready, and then remember that connection profile, you can choose when to go in and turn it back on so that it works, but it's off. Nobody can send anything because it's off. And then you decide to turn it on. So my recommendation is to go on and get certified first time for everything, so you're ready to go, and you just turn it on when you're ready. Everybody good with that, onboarding? Because we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, which is not really compliance, but here it is. So when it comes to compliance, what do you need to consider? Well, from a regulatory perspective, Reg J is the big granddaddy, Mac Daddy. It wins, it says it all. It's what created FedNow. Is there anything in there you need to go get? Nope. It's subpart C. It's actually pretty short. There's not much in it. I go over other regulatory aspects of things. Like I just recently did a Reg E course dedicated to FedNow, and it's got a couple little things in Reg J that basically do say EFTA applies. And you know, speaking of that, EFTA does apply. Regulation E is going to apply when it comes to working with FedNow and CFPB and what they're coming out with, a lot of their FAQs and proposals too, it applies. As far as FedNow specific, operating circular 8, you're having trouble sleeping at night, or something's just bothering you, you need to get off your mind, go read operating circular 8. I guarantee you'll never be more confused than you were before. It is exactly how the Fed operates and processes, and it's written in all this legalese. I mean, I make fun of it and say all that. The truth is, some people, it's really easy to read. For me, it is. I'm one of those weird people. I can read Operating Circular 8 and I can tell you what it says, but it gives you all of the aspects of how the FedNow service is to operate. So it's what's called the Operating Circular. There are some things that are in there. I have made a course and even a book on this one to make it a lot easier to read because it can be complicated. But there's things that if you're reading through Operating Circular 8, I'm going to tell you, look for must, may, always, never type statements. Because like I told you, you must have personnel that are authorized to be able to make changes and available on FedNow. That comes actually from, I think it's section 8 of Operating Circular 8. That's authorized personnel have to be there. It covers things like if you do have problems, what's that process going to look like as far as the Fed being able to terminate or restrict your use of the service itself. Regulation E, consumer payments, UCC 4A. Of course, it's going to apply for our business type payments. It actually, according to Reg J, UCC 4A does apply to consumer payments. However, if there is ever a contradiction between Reg E and UCC 4A, Reg E will win. And of course, it does give better and more protection. Another note on Reg E, since I was just saying it, I thought I did say it, but I want to make sure. You do have to build dispute processing for Regulation E. How many of you went, but it's a credit push only? I know it's a credit push only, but back to that fraud word. There can be situations where somebody sent something and goes, I didn't send that. I mean, you have it now before we're going live with FedNow. So you will have to have dispute resolution processes in place for that. Okay, other ones after UC 4A. OFAC. Whew. I get this one a lot. Again, I built a whole course around this one and I can sum it up for you, but there's more to it. The truth is, you do not have to do OFAC screening at the time of sending or receiving a FedNow transaction. I can prove it to you. I can show you where it's written down, all of that. Can you though? And the answer is you can if you want to. Can you as in if it's possible? And the answer to that is yes, it's actually quite possible. You work with your service provider or providers, depending on how it works. And part of the process for FedNow, like for example, if you go to send a FedNow transaction, let's say this is the FedNow line. On this line, you're in the FedNow network. On this side, you're not. So a transaction starts over here. It's waiting to get in. It's ready. It's go. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. Well, before you let it go, you can screen that transaction. That's important because the FedNow clock hasn't started. But once you screen it and once you let it go, the gate's on, it's moving. Our clock starts ticking. That includes the receiver receiving it. That includes the receiving financial institution receiving it and making those funds available. Can they successfully do an OFAC screening in that time? And the answer is, you betcha. OFAC screening is actually rather quick. And what happens? What happens if it's a hit? Etc. Got a course going all over this. You'll use what we call accept without posting, which means you then basically take this transaction you received and you put it over on the side for special handling purposes. And there are some steps, processes, procedures you need to go through. It is something that you will have to document and build into your policies and procedures as far as how you're handling risk assessments, audits, all of that are also important. And they're our last topic for the day that we're going to discuss, unless you have any questions. A risk assessment for being able to get on FedNow. Nothing says you have to do it, but I would, look at what FFIEC says, which basically is anytime you add a new product or service that causes major changes, you need to be able to do a risk assessment. And based on that, I would say, yes, you should be doing a risk assessment for FedNow. Audits. Okay, there are no requirements in Operating Circular 8 or the FedNow Service Operating Procedures that say you have to do an audit. Because it is a Fed service, you actually do the Fed Quality Assurance Program assertion letter or attestation letter saying that, hey, yeah, we're doing everything securely. However, I would recommend that you do an audit. I would recommend that you do a risk assessment. And that's where you've got people like Saltmarsh here to be able to help you. Folks, I am Kevin Olsen. I am the Payments Professor. You can find me all over online. Got the website, got the YouTube channel, got Instagram going. And normally this is where I say, class dismissed. But we're going to go with any questions?
Kevin. So I think we have a few questions that have been submitted. Does the Fed have a directory of banks/credit unions that are using FedNow?
Actually, yes. What you can do is, like when I pulled that 177, there's on the FedNow Explorer site, there is an active participants list that does list everybody that's actively there. They have the participants and they actually have the service providers too that are out there, and it shows the service providers for what they're certified to be able to do, and then it lists the participants that are out there. So it's not, let's say, a directory, but if you go out to the FedNow Explorer website, and I would just Google FedNow participants and correspondence, something like that, and the link that goes to FedNow Explorer, you go there, you'll be able to see everybody that is already on the network. Something else too, that once you're within the FedNow network, you might be going, how do I keep track of everybody that's on board? You don't really have to, because the FedNow service uses what we call the FedNow participant file. And at the beginning of every FedNow day, that participant file is sent out to service providers to be able to update the list of everybody who is now confirmed live on the actual network itself. So those are two ways to be able to track and know who's there. The FedNow Explorer site is public. The FedNow participant file is something your providers work with, and it is more public and secured within the network.
Okay. Another audience question. Does anybody know what the volume looks like with FedNow?
I did answer that one as we were going through, and I wish that I knew, but nobody knows. You're going to get into Fort Knox before you're going to get those volume numbers. I mean, I try to get people drunk and give them money. I'm just telling you, it's truth. And they wouldn't tell me.
Oh my
Hey,
God.
Kevin, I'm curious if you have any, I know you can't be highly specific, but any kind of indication on what most institutions are choosing as kind of that max threshold? Are they really going with the 500,000, or are they really dialing it back? Do you have any?
What we are telling people from a provider perspective is we're saying go ahead and put it at the max on there, and then control it per user for how you want to be able to have that. One of the things that people like to do too is don't let consumers send money they don't have. So, you know, when they go to send something, first of all, do look and make sure they have the funds available. However, in most cases, like most payment channels, I will tell them, let's get a good history of the account itself. And if they've never sent more than $300, why would I give them a more than $300 limit? And what you can also do is you can have it set up, again, depending on the system, that if they go to try and send 500, it'll say, hey, you can't send 500, contact this number so that we can work with you, where you could adjust the limit to be higher. But that's what most people are doing. A lot of them are, you know, putting just like, say, $500 limits though in place for most consumers, sometimes even lower, and then looking at about $2,500 to $3,000 limits for some businesses.
Is there, one more quick question, any evidence that fraudsters have identified this platform yet, or are you seeing some fraud come through, or none at all?
No fraud that I'm aware of, and I can also look over to the RTP network, which has had minimal fraud too. Because the truth is, to answer that question, I promise all of you, the fraudsters know what's going on. They have gone, I mean, they've taken my classes. I know it because the questions they ask, I'm like, no bank or credit union is going to ask me that question. And I don't answer those. I do answer a lot of questions, but I don't answer those, you know. And they've been working around the globe with other instant payment systems for years. The US, we're just catching up. Newsflash, this has been available for decades in some places. And so the fraudsters, they are prepared, but it's just like everything. They are always, it seems like, one step ahead of us, and they're going to go after what works and is the easiest. And that's actually one of the reasons why we have so much check fraud right now, is it's a lot easier for them to work the check channels. But in no way am I saying FedNow will be immune from fraud.
Right. Well, in the interest of time, I guess we probably need to close this out, but thank you very much, Kevin, for your time. We'll look forward maybe to the next time we get together and talk about this. Thanks everybody for joining us. And Nancy, anything you need to say before we head out?
Just remember to take our survey before you exit, and a recording and slide deck will be in your inbox shortly. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.